I think he did reasonably well as Chancellor. I mean, difficult to judge a chancellorship after such a short period and with such an extreme event happening as COVID. So, yeah, I mean, he didn't disgrace himself. Would have gone on perhaps to be one of the better chancellors.
It's only 1 year, but it will be the anniversary on Wednesday since Rishi Sunak was appointed Prime Minister, and he's a relatively young man. So we thought we'd take a look back at the year gone by for the Prime Minister and go a little further back into the rise of Rishi Sunak. And joining me to do that is the man who doubtless is already preparing his next book on Prime Ministers, Sunak at 10, the historian Anthony Seldon. Good afternoon to you.
Hello, Adam.
Now, let's start with the young Rishi Sunak. He went to Winchester School, Oxford. Then he worked at the bank Goldman Sachs. And following in the footsteps of William Hague, he then became the MP for the same constituency, Richmond in Yorkshire. But even at the start of his political career, he was dogged by perhaps a somewhat ill-advised confession he made as a young Conservative.
I have friends who are aristocrats, I have friends who are upper class, I have friends who are, working class, but I'm not working class, but I mix and match, and then I go to see kids from an inner city state school and tell them, to apply to Oxford and talk to them about people like me, and then I shock them at the end of chatting to them for half an hour and tell them I was at Winchester, and, one of my best friends is from Eton or whatever, and then they're like, oh, okay.
Bit of a gaffe that, wasn't it? As a start of a political career, I have no working class friends.
Well, yeah, but also honest. And I think we should prize honesty more, even if it doesn't meet the gaffe-free test of the media at times. I'm all for honesty, and that was a reflection of who he was. No, I don't think that was a gaffe, particularly Adam. It certainly didn't stop him becoming Chancellor or Prime Minister. More to the question is, what's he done as Prime Minister?
We'll come on to that in a moment, but let's just look at his ministerial career. He got his first job in the Levelling Up Department in 2018, then moved on to the Treasury, first as Chief Secretary, and then a year later taking over from his boss, Sajid Javid, in 2020 as Chancellor, when he was first properly introduced to the voters.
The actions I've taken today represent an unprecedented economic intervention to support the jobs and incomes of the British people.
So how did he do as largely a finance minister, particularly as Treasury? He was talking there about the furlough scheme, but he also was responsible for the Eat Out to Help Out scheme. Good performance as a Chancellor, Sir Anthony?
Adam, I think he did. He shouldn't have been Chancellor, wouldn't have been but for Dominic Cummings feeling that Sajid Javid, the then Chancellor, was getting in his Dominic Cummings' way. And so he thought that Rishi would be much more biddable for him. And the team around Rishi Sunak, like Liam Booth-Smith, didn't work out that way any more than it did for Johnson. Rishi Sunak quickly proved he was his own person and became, in fact, far more political as a Chancellor, not least with Eat Out, the whole Eat Out scheme. And I think he did reasonably well as Chancellor. I mean, difficult to judge a chancellorship after such a short period and with such an extreme event happening as COVID. So, yeah, I mean, he didn't disgrace himself. Would have gone on perhaps to be one of the better chancellors.
His was perhaps the key resignation in the cascade of resignations which brought down Boris Johnson. What did you make of his taking the decision to do that?
Well, unlike Liz Truss, he was manoeuvring. His team around him were manoeuvring for Rishi Sunak to take over. And as I said, he became increasingly political, deeply alienated politically and economically and financially from Boris Johnson, utterly frustrated by Johnson's flip-floppering and lack of any grip, really, on the job of Prime Minister. So it was a plausible bid. And he didn't get it first time, but he did when Liz Truss collapsed. I think that's not unusual, Adam, in the rise to power. I mean, very swift, but very few of the prime ministers last 8 have had much experience of any department at all in Whitehall. They just bounced into number 10 thinking that they can know how to do it, whereas their predecessors were stupid or malign and hopeless, but they will crack it. And that was pretty much his attitude. I think that with hindsight, he missed the really great lesson that all great prime ministers have, which is they need to tell a story. There needs to be a convincing story, not so much their own backstory, but the story of why their party in power at this particular point in history is uniquely appropriate to take the country forward, and why the opposition uniquely inappropriate. All the great prime ministers, Churchill, Thatcher, Lloyd George, Clement Attlee, have been storytellers, but instead he opted for 5 micro plans and targets on boats and NHS targets and inflation. And he didn't meet those, but I think that was a tactical error. He didn't really think about history. He should have looked at Alec Douglas-Hume's 1-year premiership at the end of 12 years of Tory government.
Well, that wasn't a triumph either, was it?
No, it wasn't. But I think he at least he held a line, or indeed the experience of Gordon Brown at the tail end of the long period of Labour ascendancy that began in '97. I think he could have thought more about the unique difficulties that a late-serving prime minister has in the period at the end of a single party dominance.
Well, let's just remind ourselves of the priorities he set himself, his first speech as prime minister.
I am humbled and honoured to have the support of my parliamentary colleagues and to be elected as leader of the Conservative and Unionist Party. It is the greatest privilege of my life to be able to serve the party I love and give back to the country I owe so much to.
Is his problem, Sir Anthony, that wasn't actually strictly accurate? I mean, he hadn't been elected, and as it's turned out, he hasn't had the wholesome support of his parliamentary colleagues.
It's always hard, as you know, if a prime minister hasn't got their own personal mandate. So Theresa May tried to do that in 2017, went catastrophically wrong. Gordon Brown's big moment when he lost his grip was when he led us up the garden path to think there was going to be a general election in 2007, and then he pulled away from it, wanting, not unreasonably, his own mandate. Always difficult for a prime minister. Look, I think that Rishi Sunak has many of the qualities. He stacks up well against the 5 Tory prime ministers since 2010. I think substantially the odds were against him. That the Tory party believes in absolutely nothing coherent. I mean, or that believes in lots of things, but doesn't believe in a unified way. But he made that. I think fundamental lost opportunity, which was not to think through what is the opportunity, what is the need for the Tory party here. How can I tell a story that it will appeal emotionally, not just quantitatively with are the hospital beds down, are the boats down, is inflation coming down, but something that really can appeal to the guts of the nation. That's what the great leaders do. And I think and his latest announcements, Adam, when he's been thinking more long term about HS2 and redistributing the money to other transport projects and spinning out the whole net zero green targets to put less pressure on motorists and voters. I mean, okay, there's an argument for all that, but it doesn't cohere into a story that's a distinctively appropriate story for this point in history. So that's what I think he's been missing. And it's very hard to reinvent yourself in power. Look, he's done very well in Israel, Gaza in the last week. Why? Because he's listened to the historian number 10 about what that opportunity is. He could have listened and thought more about history earlier on while there was still time.
Okay, final question, really. You've done a bit of ranking of prime ministers in the past. You mentioned the 5 prime ministers we've had since 2010. Would you like to stack them up, starting with the worst and ending with the best, and including Rishi
Oh,
Sunak?
Adam, that's really mean. That's really mean. I mean, I'll do it. Look on a global scale of the 57 prime ministers. But what I do is I eschew the notion that you can rank them from 1 to 57 as just
I've
a
just asked
parlor
you 1 to
game.
5. Right?
Okay, well, I would say I'm going to rank them. I think that Cameron and Rishi Sunak were the most accomplished. Technically, I think Cameron was a bit too young when he got it, much too young actually, like Blair, and learnt. But Blair had 10 years, Cameron had 6, was just beginning Cameron to get out, work out how to do it when he lost the referendum. So I'd put him and Rishi Sunak at the top of those 5, and I'd put Boris Johnson at the worst, of the 57. I mean, he was
Worse than Truss?
a failure, and an ignoble failure who cheapened the country, cheapened the office, and just was too lacking in gravitas and seriousness to know how to be prime minister. It's not a joke being prime minister. It really is an honour, as Rishi Sunak said. And I think we need to have people who we can admire and respect, and even if we disagree with them, who conduct themselves in a trustworthy way.